Welcome to Into the Arms of Morpheus podcast, a quiet story from history. Tonight, the ship that came back alone. Close your eyes. It is December. The Atlantic Ocean, somewhere between the Azores and the coast of Portugal. The sea is calm today, grey and wide and very still. Long, slow swells moving under the surface, lifting and dropping everything on it, with a patience that the ocean has had for longer than anything else on earth. The sky above is pale and flat. No particular weather, just the grey light of a December day over the North Atlantic, which is its own particular quality of light, different from any other kind, cold and even and very diffuse, coming from everywhere at once and casting almost no shadow on anything. The water reflects this light back in a dull, even gleam across the surface, the kind of light that makes it difficult to tell at a distance exactly where the horizon is. The sky and the sea are the same pale grey, the line between them soft and indefinite. A ship appears. She is far off at first, just a shape against the grey. A two-masted sailing vessel, the kind that works the Atlantic trade routes in these years, carrying cargo between the Americas and Europe. She is moving, but not with any clear intention, drifting rather than sailing. Her sails are set, but not correctly, some drawing wind and some slack, the arrangement suggesting something begun and not finished, the work of someone who had started adjusting the sails and then stopped. The men on a nearby vessel watch her for a while. Their ship is the Dei Gratia, also out of New York, making the same eastward crossing. Her captain watches the other vessel through his glass. She is moving in an unusual way, not distressed exactly, just drifting, going wherever the wind and the current decide to take her, with no sign of anyone on her deck making decisions about it. She does not answer when they hail her. No one appears. They sail closer. They bring their small boat over and put 3 men aboard. The 3 men climb to the deck of the other ship. They look around. They call out into the ship. They receive no answer from anywhere. They go below and move through the ship from one end to the other, opening every door, looking into every space, calling as they go, and hearing only the sounds of an empty ship, the creak of the hull, the movement of the water outside, the sound of their own footsteps. The ship is the Mary Celeste. She left New York just over a week ago. She has a full cargo in her hold. She is in reasonable condition. Everything on her appears to be as it should be, except the people. The people are gone. The Mary Celeste was a brigantine, a two-masted sailing vessel built for carrying cargo on Atlantic routes. She was not a large ship, and she was not a famous one. She had been working the trade for several years before this voyage, carrying whatever needed carrying between wherever she happened to be and wherever things needed to go. Timber sometimes, coal, general cargo, whatever a merchant wanted moved across an ocean for a reasonable price. She had changed hands a few times over the years. She had been repaired and modified as working vessels are, in the practical way that prioritizes function over any other consideration, adding capacity here, replacing worn timbers there, doing what is needed to keep a working ship working. She had been bought and lengthened not long before this voyage, given more cargo capacity, made more practical for the kind of work she was going to do. This voyage was one of her first major passages after that work. The cargo was 1,700 barrels of commercial alcohol, sealed and stacked carefully in the hold, bound for a wine merchant in Genoa who would use it to fortify wine, a common commodity, a routine commission, the kind of work the Mary Celeste had been built for. The captain was a careful man, experienced. He had sailed the Atlantic many times and knew its moods and its routes and its seasons. He was the kind of man who keeps a neat log and arrives at the places he says he will arrive at, who takes the work seriously and does it without drama. He had an interest in the Mary Celeste. She was partly his own, which was common among working captains of the era, a relationship between a man and his ship that went beyond employment into something more like partnership. His wife had come with him on this voyage. This was not unusual. Captains sometimes brought their families on longer passages, particularly when the ship was partly their own and the voyage was to a reliable destination. She played a small keyboard instrument called a melodeon, a portable thing designed for domestic use, small enough to fit in a ship's cabin without taking up too much of the limited space. She had brought it aboard in New York, wrapped carefully, and installed it in the captain's cabin. It produced a quiet, reedy, pleasant sound when played, the kind of sound that fills a small room without filling it too much. Their daughter was not yet 2 years old. She was the youngest person on the Mary Celeste by a considerable margin, too young to understand what an ocean was, or what a crossing meant, or why the world moved continuously beneath her. She had a pair of small boots that her mother set beside the bunk when they were below, and she wore them on deck when the weather was mild enough. She had found her sea legs within the first day or two. The motion of the ship had simply become the normal motion of the world, as it does for the very young, who have not yet accumulated enough experience to know that most worlds do not move this way. The 7 crew members were working sailors from different countries and different circumstances, brought together by the ordinary mechanics of the maritime labour market. Their names were recorded in the ship's articles when they signed on in New York. They did what they were hired to do. They sailed the ship. 10 people in total, setting out from New York on a November day, carrying their full cargo, under a sky that gave no sign of anything other than a routine winter crossing of the Atlantic. The captain kept a log, as captains did. He wrote in it each day in neat, careful handwriting, the date and the time, the ship's position, calculated from observations of the sun and the stars using the instruments of the era, the wind direction and its force, recorded in the precise language that navigators use, language that has been developed over centuries to describe the behavior of the ocean in terms that mean the same thing to everyone who reads them, that carry no ambiguity and no interpretation. The state of the sea, the ship's speed and heading, any observations about the cargo, the rigging, the crew, the weather. The early entries are unremarkable. Good winds from the southwest, steady progress toward the Azores, the ship performing well after her refit. Nothing to note except the normal accumulation of days and miles, the kind of log entries that are useful as a record and interesting to no one in particular, which is exactly what they should be. He wrote here and there about his daughter, small observations, the kind a father makes when the usual pressures and distractions of life have been removed, and he has time to notice the things that are normally in the background. The way she had settled into the ship's routine, the way the constant motion did not trouble her, the particular things she found interesting, the light on the water from certain angles, the birds that occasionally followed the ship for a day and then were not there the next morning, the faces of the crew members who sometimes stopped to spend a moment with her on deck. The observations are brief and without sentimentality, just a few lines at the end of an entry, but they are there. In the evenings his wife played the melodeon. The sound of it came from the captain's cabin and drifted out into the corridor and faded before it reached the deck. A quiet, domestic sound, present but not insistent. The sound of someone playing in the evening because they have an instrument and the time and the inclination and no particular audience in mind. The kind of sound that makes a ship feel inhabited rather than merely manned. The log entries continue, regular and careful and unremarkable, for roughly 10 days after the ship left New York. The handwriting does not change. The entries do not become shorter or more hurried. They remain what they were from the beginning. The methodical record of an ordinary voyage, proceeding as an ordinary voyage should. Then the entries stop. The last one is dated around the 25th of November. It records the weather, the position, the state of the cargo. An entry like any other. Nothing in it suggests that the next entry will not follow, as all the others have followed. After that, the pages are blank. Not damaged, not removed, not water-stained, simply blank, as they were when the log was new. The pen had not returned to the page after that date, and whatever happened after the 25th of November was not written down anywhere by anyone who was there to write it. The log was found in the captain's cabin when the Mary Celeste was boarded. It was where it should have been. It ended where it ended. When the three men from the Dei Gratia moved through the Mary Celeste, they were methodical about it. They began in the hold. The cargo was there, all 1,700 barrels in their positions, still sealed. The manifest listed every barrel, and every barrel was accounted for. The hold was intact. There was no sign that the cargo had been disturbed at any point since loading. Whatever had happened on the Mary Celeste, it had not involved the 1,700 barrels of commercial alcohol sitting sealed and stacked in her hold. They went through the crew quarters. The 7 men's belongings were in their berths, clothing folded or hung on hooks, sea boots, pipes and tobacco, letters in some cases, the kind that working men at sea carry with them, kept in a pocket or folded inside a jacket, from wives or families back in whatever country they had left. Personal objects, small and practical, specific to each man who owned them. Nothing was missing. Nothing had been taken. The belongings of 7 men who had not returned to claim them sat exactly where they had been left. The galley. Someone had been preparing food. The stove had gone cold hours or days before the ship was found, but the evidence of the interrupted meal was there. Food in pots, preparation underway at the moment it was abandoned. The ordinary work of feeding 10 people at sea stopped at some point and never resumed. They went to the captain's cabin. The melodeon stood in its corner, small and upright, producing no sound now with no one to play it, but undamaged and in its place. The movement of the ship at sea had not shifted it or toppled it. It stood where it had stood since New York, in the corner where the captain's wife had placed it. On the table, the needlework, a piece of fabric stretched on a small wooden frame, the pattern partly completed in coloured thread. The needle was still in the fabric, pushed through to one side, the thread trailing from it in the way that happens when someone sets work down with the clear expectation of returning to it shortly. The needle had been in the fabric since the moment the work was set down. It remained in the fabric now. On the floor beside the bunk, the small boots, sized for feet not yet 2 years old, sitting close together on the cabin floor, side by side, exactly as they would sit if someone had just set them there a moment ago. The 3 men looked at these things, the melodeon, the needlework with the trailing thread, the boots beside the bunk. Then they went back up to the deck and looked at the davits. The davits were empty. The ropes that had held the lifeboat hung loose over the ship's side. The lifeboat was gone. That was the only absence. Everything else was there. the cargo, the belongings, the food, the melodeon, the needlework, the boots, all of it there, and the people not. The Mary Celeste was sailed into Gibraltar by a small crew from the Dei Gratia. There was an inquiry. A court convened to examine the ship and consider what could be established from the available evidence. The condition of everything aboard was documented. The log was read and discussed. The cargo was assessed. Witnesses were questioned. The court worked through what was known and what was not known, with the patience that such proceedings require. At the end of it, the court had no conclusion to offer. The ship was sound. The cargo was intact. The stores were there. The log was there. The personal belongings of every person on board were there. There was nothing in any of this that pointed clearly toward an explanation for why the people had left. And the people had passed entirely out of reach. The sea had received them, and the sea offered nothing back, as it does not. The case was eventually set aside. The ocean is very large, and it keeps what it takes. This is a fact about the sea that everyone who works on it understands, and the Mary Celeste was one instance of it. More visible than most because of the particular circumstances in which the ship was found. More discussed than most, but not different in kind from the many other things the Atlantic has absorbed over the centuries, without explanation. The ocean does not explain itself. It has never explained itself. Ships have been crossing the Atlantic for 4 centuries, and the ocean has kept no record of them. It was here before the first crossing, and it will be here after the last. And between those 2 points, it has simply been what it is: cold and deep and wide, and entirely indifferent to the things that move across its surface, or disappear from it, or are absorbed by it without trace. The inquiry concluded. The ship was returned to service. Life went on in the way it goes on after things that cannot be resolved, by accepting that some things remain open, by turning toward the next day, by continuing. The ocean continued too, as it always does. There is a particular quality to a room that was recently occupied and is now empty. A room that has never had anyone in it is simply neutral. It has no residue, no impression of presence, nothing that suggests it has ever been inhabited. It is just enclosed space, walls and floor and ceiling and air. But a room where people have lived, even briefly, carries something after the people are gone. Not anything visible or measurable, just the shape of the occupancy, the specific way that these particular people and no others inhabited this particular space. The arrangement of objects that is theirs, the stages things are at because of them, the presence of things that are there because they brought them or used them or set them down. The captain's cabin on the Mary Celeste had been lived in for 10 days when the ship was found. 10 days is enough time to make a space yours, to give it the specific character of your habitation. The melodeon in its corner was not just an object placed there. It was where she kept her melodeon, which is a different thing. The needlework on the table was not just fabric. It was the work she was doing at this stage, set down here with the expectation of returning to it. The boots beside the bunk were not just boots. They were her daughter's boots, placed there by her hands in the particular way that mothers place their children's things. Each of these objects had a relationship with her that they did not have with anyone else in the world. They were where they were because of her choices and her hands and the specific pattern of her days aboard the ship. When the 3 men from the Dei Gratia stood in that cabin, they were standing in the exact shape of an absence. Everything present was present because of her. The stage of the needlework was the stage her hands had brought it to. The position of the boots was the position she had left them in. The melodeon was in its corner because that was where she had put it. Sailors understand this kind of reading better than most people. They know what a lived-in ship looks like, and they know what it looks like when the living has stopped. They have seen empty bunks and untouched belongings before, in circumstances where someone does not return. They know the particular quality of a space that has been left rather than abandoned. The 3 men stood in the cabin for a moment without saying anything. Then they went back up to the deck and got on with the work of sailing the ship to Gibraltar. Behind them, the melodeon remained in its corner. The needle remained in the fabric. The small boots remained beside the bunk. The ship moved east through the grey Atlantic winter, crewed by strangers now, and the objects in the cabin continued in the positions where they had been left, as objects do, without knowledge, without the capacity to wait or wonder, simply remaining where they were. The Mary Celeste was returned to service after the inquiry concluded. New captain, new crew. The cargo was eventually delivered to its destination. The legal questions were resolved, as legal questions are resolved, with time and paperwork and the gradual settling of competing claims. The ship was available again, and ships that are available are put to work, because that is what ships are. She made other voyages, carried other cargoes on other routes. Other crews signed on and served their time and collected their pay and went ashore and found other ships and other work. The Mary Celeste accumulated the years that working vessels accumulate, passage by passage, port by port, each year adding to the total of miles sailed and cargoes carried and repairs made and small incidents weathered and resolved. She was sold when she was sold, repaired when she needed it, modified when modification seemed useful. She did what she was built to do, in the way that things built for a purpose do it, without reflection. The story of her discovery spread through the maritime world in those first years, and was discussed in the places where sailors gathered. For some time it remained a maritime curiosity, unusual, worth talking about, but not yet anything more than that. One strange thing among the many strange things that happen at sea. Then the story changed in the telling, as stories do when the facts run out and the gaps grow large. Things were added that had never happened. The real ship, the ordinary working vessel, with her barrels of alcohol and her melodeon and her unfinished meal, became a different kind of story, a ghost ship, a legend, something to attach explanations to, explanations that had nothing to do with the actual known facts, but that satisfied the human need to account for things that cannot otherwise be accounted for. The real ship continued her real working life through all of this, unaware of being famous, doing what working ships do. She ended on a reef off Haiti, 12 years after the December of her notoriety. The circumstances were disputed. The inquiry was inconclusive, as such inquiries often were. The ocean took her, as it takes everything that is placed on it long enough, without drama, without any particular ceremony, simply by being what it is. She went quietly. The Atlantic moved over where she had been and continued moving, as it had been moving before she was built, as it continues to move now, in the same cold grey way, in the same wide, indifferent manner, without reference to anything that has passed across it. The Atlantic tonight is the same Atlantic, the same body of water that held the Mary Celeste as she drifted in December is here now. Not the same water exactly. The ocean circulates slowly, the water in one place moving and being replaced over years. The great deep currents completing their loops over decades and centuries, carrying cold from one part of the ocean to another, in movements too slow and too vast for any single life to observe from beginning to end. But the same ocean, the same presence, the same cold and grey and ancient Atlantic that has been here since long before anyone put a ship on it. The North Atlantic has a quality that people who know it describe differently from other oceans. It is not the largest, or the warmest, or the deepest, but it is serious in a way that is difficult to define precisely. The colour of it in northern latitudes, that particular grey-green that belongs to cold water under a winter sky, the weight of the weather it produces, the great low-pressure systems that form over it and cross it, and deliver long weeks of grey days to everything around it. The long fetch of the wind, uninterrupted by land for thousands of miles, building swells that carry themselves across enormous distances and arrive at distant shores having lost very little. Or perhaps the quality is simply the history of it, the many crossings made by ships of every kind over centuries, the things the Atlantic has carried and the things it has kept. It does not distinguish between them. A king's ransom and a working sailor's tobacco pouch and a small child's boots. The ocean receives them all the same way, without preference, without memory. The surface closes over everything equally, and the water continues. Most of what happens within it is not witnessed by anyone. Ships make their crossings and are not seen by other ships. Storms build in open water and dissolve without anyone watching them. The deep currents circulate in the dark, far below the surface, in water that has not been at the surface for centuries, in water that has not seen light in longer than anyone can hold in their mind. Creatures live and die far below, and their remains drift slowly down through the dark and settle in the sediment at the bottom and are absorbed. And at the surface, the waves, each one arriving from somewhere and going somewhere, each one rising and falling and being followed by the next. This has been happening since before the Mary Celeste existed, since before any ship crossed this ocean. It will be happening long after all of it is gone. A melodeon in the corner of an empty cabin, a piece of needlework with the needle still threaded, a small pair of boots beside a bunk. These things are gone now. The ship is gone. Everyone who was on the ship is gone. Everything connected to the Mary Celeste has passed out of the world in the ordinary way that things pass, one after another, without announcement, until nothing remains. Only the ocean remains, cold and grey and very wide, moving as it always has, moving as it is moving now. You are floating tonight, held up by something vast and quiet. You do not need to understand it. The water is moving beneath you. The stars are there. Rest now and drift slowly into the arms of Morpheus.